everyone, welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. I'm Thomas, and you are watching Nambu Problems Part 2. My Wolff spring kit mentioned in Part 1 has arrived, and if you haven't watched Part 1 of this video, essentially, I am having problems with my Nambu Type 94, not an uncommon issue. First video, we basically went over diagnosing the problem and looked at what that problem actually was, which was twofold. One part being the mag spring seeming weak, and the other part being the trigger having trouble engaging the sear on the side of the gun. Now, this spring kit should more than solve that problem. I actually don't need most of the springs in here, though I am going to install all of them that I can. In my test taking the Nambu apart, I did find that I'm having trouble actually getting the sear itself out. There's a little pin that you're supposed to be able to remove, and mine doesn't want to break free. Thankfully, I'm fairly certain that that doesn't have anything to do with the actual problem, and if this fixes it, then we'll be ending the video with test shots. We'll be ending the video with an attempt at test shots either way, but hopefully that attempt is a success. Now, let's go ahead and get to the tabletop and take a look at installation of this spring kit. This is going to be a relatively comprehensive takedown of this pistol, and if you want a 100% takedown, I would recommend that you check out the channel Fatty with a Firearm. His video on the 100% Nambu Type 94 takedown is actually what I referenced to learn how to do this, so definitely give him a look. Got good content. Now, we're going to go ahead and remove the mag here and rack it. And I did go through and clean the insides relatively thoroughly, and that did actually improve the problem. The magazine itself, for instance, before we go into the full takedown, I've got some Steinel ammo, 8mm Nambu, 88 grain FMJ here. These hold 6 rounds, and if you recall from the first video, it was getting stuck on just 2 or 3 rounds. So go ahead and load this for all 6. Gets pretty tough here. And 6. There we go. Now, it's still a little stiff and kind of gets stuck on that 6th shot. There we go. Went and pulled that a few times, but I think with a bit more thorough cleaning of this, it will be functioning properly, because as is, it actually is cycling. Just have to finick with it a bit to get it in the state to do so. Now, we don't need the mag for the rest of this process. The only item we're going to need going forward is this screwdriver right here, or any screwdriver, flathead will do, and we're only going to need this for a couple of parts of this process. But first off, the field strip segment. So with your mag out, go ahead and make sure your gun is racked. Now we're going to pull this, slide back and hold it a little bit, and you see this pin here? We're going to reach in and push up on the firing pin, which can actually be accessed from inside right there. We're going to kind of push it forward more so than up. Push that forward and then reach around to the back and push that pin. Now should be able to just grab it and pull it free. It can be kind of stubborn, and sometimes it's kind of need a third hand, but not really. It's just a bit of an inconvenience. Try and push it out a little bit more there, and there we go. That did it. Now that is free. With that, we can let the slide forward, and this whole back piece comes out. And in here is our firing pin and firing pin spring. There's the firing pin and the firing pin spring. Now the firing pin spring on this is actually in relatively decent condition, but I'm going to go ahead and open up this pack here, dump these out, and sort these out a bit. Now, I'm going to keep these springs kind of separate of everything else that is going on. I'm actually going to put the magazine between these springs and everything else, so as I replace springs, I know that nothing on this side is old. And I'm going to put old springs off to the side over here. So looking for the counterpart to this one. This one looks like a match, at least the nearest among these. So go ahead and drop this into there. Then our firing pin. And you want to make sure that this flat bar is facing up. And there we go, and it still pokes through. That seems all well and good. Now we can set this aside. We don't need to worry about that anymore, and we've got the old spring off to the side. Now, with a little bit of momentum, this should be just coming off. There we go. Sometimes it takes a few tries. That kind of grabbed our locking block and just pulled it out along with it. You got barrel, collar, and you want to make sure this collar is oriented the correct direction. This like razor sharp edge should be facing this direction. And then we've got our main recoil spring. Now that one is going to be easy enough to find the replacement, and you can see there's been some compression over time, so this should, help. Set those aside. At this point, you've taken apart everything that you can without a screwdriver. The first thing that we're going to do is remove the grips. So make sure that's facing the correct direction. This one has a little bit of a lip here that feeds under when you go to reinstall. And then the other side, and this one has been cracked in the past, and it seems that somebody has glued it. And after my earlier takedown of this, I did leave these grip screws intentionally loose. No need to further damage anything. This one is a bit more beat up. You can see there's glue where this was cracked, right where my pinky is here. Set our grips off to the side. Now, the big thing that we're going to be removing here going forward is the trigger. There are some other things like your safety, actual safety lever. You kind of have to pull up and then rotate straight down 90 degrees, and then your safety kind of wiggles free. And you can see there's a notch that fits in right there. To extract the sear bar itself, there's a pin, and you can see the head of this pin right at the tip of my finger there. Should be able to drive it out from the bottom. I tried, and nothing that I did was making that pin come out. So hopefully the actual sear bar isn't the problem. And this is a hammer-fired pistol. You can actually see the hammer right there, still cocked, and you can see what happens when we push in on the sear bar. It goes home. All of that seems to be functioning properly. What isn't functioning properly, we can go ahead and recock this, if I can get the leverage. There we go. And you can even see this with the magazine in. And again, I did clean this pretty thoroughly, and it did help this, but it should be, there we go. It took me 4 tries to get it to fire there. And you can see the sear bar wiggles when I pull the trigger. The safety actually, when in the engaged safe position, of which is facing this way, literally blocks the sear bar from moving. So it's actually a relatively safe system when locked. There's Ian McCollum did a full takedown of people calling this the most dangerous gun of World War II. It can be if handled improperly, but realistically it shouldn't be being handled improperly. We do want the hammer to be cocked when we go to put this gun back together, so you can pretty simply just push it back into place. And there is a pin that goes through this roller right here. You need to make sure that that is in place or it will not cock. Now, got that back together. The trigger itself, we're gonna need to remove this pin, and this is the part that I believe is the actual problem. Once you've got it fully loosened, you're gonna have to just pull it the rest of the way through. And you may have to kind of manipulate the trigger a little bit to make this easier. It is a pretty long screw. And you can see that spring right there. Now, this is what I believe is the problem. To get this out, just pull your trigger forward and it should just fall free. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and find its counterpart. Seems to be this one right here. Go ahead and set the old one off to the side. Now, to pull the trigger the rest of the way out, you have to kind of maneuver it through the top. And there is some very fine workings in here that can also pretty easily be removed. And we're going to go ahead and do that and swap out that spring just while we're here at this point. So that pin right there, you need to drive that out. And to do that, you need to kind of push down on this little spring-loaded piece here. And that does feel a little stiff. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get some gun lube and put it in there before I do this. Now, what we need to do, again, take some pressure off of that by pushing down, and then we're going to just use the tip of our flathead to poke that pin through. And we want it to be sticking out this back side so that we can grab it and pull it the rest of the way out. Though this side doesn't seem to be wanting to come out that way. So we're going to try from the other direction. Okay, there, it just fell out on its own. That's a relief because that was getting very annoying. Now, pull that free, and then we've got this little teeny tiny spring here. That is definitively the counterpart to that. So throw the old one aside. Now let's go ahead and put this back together before we go any farther because these pieces are all tiny. We're just going to go ahead and set the spring in. It is impossible to put this in incorrectly, so just need to make sure the spring goes into it. That's the only thing that can be a little bit of an annoyance. There we go. Now, hold it down. Take your pin and push it through, and you want it to be flush on both sides. When you release the pressure on this, there's no fear of that pin falling out. And that is as far as we're going to take this. There are a couple of other things, namely if you're going to remove the sear bar, we'd already mentioned this, but you just need to drive that pin up from this side and then pull it out the top. But this one is being stubborn with that. As far as the trigger, you need to remove the screw, and then that gets a little bit into a deeper process. When we were getting it to connect and fire, that wasn't being a problem, so I'm not going to bother with it. We do have additional springs here for separate parts of that. Most of these would go into this into the trigger itself. This spring, I believe, is the one that would fit over the sear bar. There's actually a piece that goes through almost to the other side, and there is a spring sitting on it like that. So I believe that's what this one right here is. But we're going to set all of that stuff aside and not worry about it and go ahead and reassemble this. So first off, the trigger back in through the top. Now we need to get the spring fished in. There's a hole here and there's a hole in the back of the trigger. I found that it's easiest if you go into the hole in the trigger wall first, and there we go. Everything is seated how it should be. Now we need to align the trigger with this hole for the screw, because the screw is going through on the side of the frame that you see here. Okay, there we go. Got it through. Now, go ahead and make sure it's lined up on that side. And we should be able to see if it's threading in, and it appears that it is. So we're solid there. Now just tighten it down the rest of the way. Don't need to go stupidly tight, but you don't want it to be loose. There we go. It's about as tight as it's going to get. Don't want to damage the head of the screw itself. Now, go ahead and put our safety back in. Okay, you need the hammer to be fired in order to reinstall this. I had forgotten that and was struggling with it there for a minute, but now we've got the hammer down and we can simply place the safety bar in and then rotate it into the fire position. Now go ahead and recock. We do again need that to be cocked for when we go to put the slide back onto the frame on this. Otherwise, everything's going to get stuck and it's going to be a nightmare. Now we can go ahead and do our grips. Again, you want to make sure that that lip goes under before you seat it. Go ahead and get this started by hand. We don't want to cross threads here. Now should be able to just tighten that back down. And again, don't want to go stupidly tight because you don't want to ruin the grips, but you also don't want it to be loose because otherwise your grips will be wobbly. Same for the other side. This is our cracked one, so I'm going to be a little more gentle even with this one than with that last one. Up next is this block here and then the barrel. So the block, you can actually reference on the slide if you forget what direction it's going. The block should line up like that on the slide. So as such, drops in like so. Then your barrel grabs onto that with that little kind of claw there. Next is the collar and the spring. And finally, the slide. And everything should just smoothly slide back into place. Once we get to this point, we need to take this whole back piece and slide it in. And it can be a little bit finicky, I've found. Things just kind of get in the way, namely the hammer kind of seems to protrude just the tiniest amount. Now with a finger, we're going to push the firing pin forward, and then you want to make sure that that notch side is where it should be. We're going to go through on that side. So push this in with a finger and then drop this in. So I'm pushing through. There we go. And that is it. Oh, that feels a lot better, actually. Let's see how it fires. Okay, it took me a couple of tries there. Felt a little stiff. I'm gonna do it a little bit more abrupt. This might be fixed. Let's go ahead and take this out to the range and test fire it. All right, ammo test. We've got 3 rounds loaded in the mag. Got the mag spring all cleaned up and it seems to be working properly. So this is only half loaded because this is purely a test. I'm just firing at a hill over there and we are just hoping to see the trigger functioning here. That is what I would consider a win. Now, here we go. Nothing on that first try. There we go. Second shot did it. Good. Good. All right, so still a little sticky. I'm gonna go through and even more thoroughly clean the internals of this, but I think we can say after what we were experiencing previously, significant progress has been made, especially with the magazine, the gun itself. You know, there may be some other fine details that need working out, but I think the next time that we see this in a video, it is going to be an official first shots short video, followed by the full-length demo of the gun, as this whole series has been about fixing it and has really only grazed the surface of talking about the history of this. So I'm excited to have this actually cycling. Hope you all enjoyed the video. It's been Thomas of Great Northwest Weaponry, and I will see you next time.